the lone rider and a distant cry. The sun, a fiery orb, beat down on the parched earth, shimmering off the endless expanse of sand and scrub. Tall Eagle, astride his paint mare, Thunder, rode west, his gaze sweeping the horizon. The Cherokee village, nestled by the winding river, was a memory now, distant and hazy. He sought new hunting grounds, a place where the buffalo still roamed free, unmolested by the encroaching settlers. His sharp eyes catalogued every detail, the nervous flick of a lizard's tail, the lazy spiral of a hawk against the cerulean sky, the subtle shift in wind direction. Each observation was a whisper from the land, a guide. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the lengthening shadows and the changing hues of the desert. Just as twilight began to paint the sky in oranges and purples, a sound, faint yet distinctly human, pierced the stillness. It was a cry, choked and desperate, carried on the cooling breeze. Tall Eagle reined Thunder in, his hand instinctively going to the war axe at his side. He listened, motionless, his senses acutely tuned. The cry came again, weaker this time, but undeniably present. Not an animal in distress, but a woman. He dismounted, leading Thunder behind a cluster of gnarled mesquite trees. His moccasined feet made no sound as he moved, a phantom in the gathering dusk. The faint scent of wood smoke reached him, then the low murmur of voices, gruff and male. He crept closer, using the sparse vegetation for cover, until he could see the flickering light of a small campfire. 3 men, rough and unkempt, sprawled around it, their shadows dancing grotesquely against the rock face. One, a lean man with a patch over one eye, was prodding the fire with a stick, a sneer on his lips. Beside him, tied to a sturdy juniper bush, sat a young woman. Her clothes were torn, her hair disheveled, and fear was etched deeply on her face. Her eyes, however, held a spark of defiance, even amidst her terror. "Still thinkin' you can just walk away, do ya, little bird?" Silas Snake-Eye Blackwood cackled, his voice a grating rasp. "You're ours now, and don't you forget it." He took a swig from a dented canteen, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. The other 2 men chuckled, their faces illuminated by the firelight, revealing cruel smiles. May flinched, but her gaze, though wide with apprehension, remained fixed on her tormentor. She tested the ropes binding her wrists, a futile effort. Tall Eagle watched, his jaw tightening. He saw the glint of a knife in Snake-Eye's belt, the heavy pistols holstered at the hips of the other 2. 3 against 1, and the woman was bound. A direct assault would be foolish. He needed a plan, swift and decisive, to free her from these vultures. The desert night was his ally, and the element of surprise would be his weapon. Shadows and escape. The moon, a sliver of bone in the ink-black sky, offered little illumination, but Tall Eagle's eyes were accustomed to the gloom. He moved like a wisp of smoke through the sparse brush, each footfall silent, each breath controlled. The crude camp, little more than a huddle of bedrolls around a dying fire, was exactly as he'd scouted it. Silas Snake-Eye Blackwood snored, a guttural rasp, near the embers, his dirty hat pulled low over his face. 2 other men, equally unkempt, lay sprawled, their rifles carelessly tossed beside them. Tall Eagle located May quickly. She was tied to a stunted oak, a gag stifling any cries. Her eyes, wide and luminous even in the near darkness, fixed on him with a mixture of terror and nascent hope. He knelt, drawing his hunting knife. The rope, rough hemp, parted with barely a whisper. May flinched as the last strand gave way, her breath catching. He met her gaze, a silent command for absolute quiet passing between them. Her slight nod was a testament to her intelligence and courage. He extended a hand, and she took it, her fingers surprisingly strong despite their tremble. Together, they crept away from the smoldering fire. Every snapped twig, every rustle of dry leaves, sent a jolt of fear through May, but Tall Eagle's grip on her hand remained steady, a silent promise of protection. They skirted the edge of the camp, avoiding a loose pile of tin cans that could have betrayed them. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and stale tobacco from the sleeping men. Once a safe distance from the camp, Tall Eagle stopped. He removed the gag from May's mouth. She gasped, a small, choked sound, her throat raw. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice reedy but clear. They would have sold me." Tall Eagle simply nodded, scanning the horizon. "Far we go." His words were clipped, practical. He didn't need elaborate explanations. May understood the urgency. He led her deeper into the dense woods, the dark canopy providing a welcome shield. The moon finally dipped below the ridge, plunging the world into a deeper, safer darkness. With every step away from the villains, the heavy weight of fear began to lift from May's shoulders, replaced by a cautious, growing sense of relief and a burgeoning trust in the silent warrior beside her. Words unknown, hearts understood. Tall Eagle's deep voice rumbled, a string of Cherokee words flowing like a mountain stream. He pointed to the north, then to himself, attempting to explain their direction and his intent to guide her to safety. May, her eyes wide, listened intently, her brow furrowed in confusion. When he finished, she offered a hesitant reply, a soft melody of Mandarin syllables that were utterly foreign to his ears. Her gestures were as graceful as a willow in the wind, but their meaning remained elusive. He tried again, slower this time, enunciating each word, but her blank stare was his only answer. Frustration, a rare visitor, pricked at him. Then, a flicker of understanding ignited in her gaze. She pointed to herself, a delicate finger tapping her chest, and pronounced a single, clear sound, "May." Tall Eagle caught on, a slow smile spreading across his face. He mirrored her action, thumping his own chest with a firm hand. "Tall Eagle," he stated, his voice a low growl, "Tall Eagle." She repeated it, a soft echo, "Tall Eagle," and a genuine smile, the first he'd seen, brightened her features. It was a small victory, but a significant one. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. Tall Eagle gestured towards a nearby cluster of rocks, indicating a place to rest. He unslung his deer-hide satchel, pulling out strips of dried venison. He offered one to May, who eyed it cautiously before accepting. The meat was tough, but its savory richness was welcome. He then presented his water skin. She drank deeply, her throat working, and for a moment, the fear that had clung to her like a shroud seemed to dissipate. They ate in silence, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a night bird. Each glance they exchanged was a silent conversation, a careful weighing of intentions. He saw a resilience in her, a quiet strength that belied her delicate frame. She, in turn, observed his steady hands, his watchful eyes, and the quiet dignity that radiated from him. The language barrier remained a formidable wall, but in the shared meal, in the simple act of sustenance, a fragile bridge of trust began to form, plank by silent plank. A token of home. The campfire, a vibrant, pulsing heart against the encroaching twilight, cast sinuous, dancing shadows that expanded and receded around them. Tall Eagle observed May, her gaze fixed on the flames, her expression a delicate fusion of weariness and an unspoken, profound grief. He noted the subtle tremor in her hands, the slight slump of her shoulders, as if braced against an unseen burden. Deliberately, May reached into the folds of her well-worn tunic. Her fingers, deft and precise, produced a small, exquisitely carved artifact. She held it forth, not directly to him, but as though presenting it to the fading light. It was a wooden comb, finely crafted, with slender teeth and a handle shaped like a blossoming plum flower. Its surface, burnished smooth by countless touches, gleamed softly. Tall Eagle's gaze softened. No words were needed for him to grasp the simple implement's profound significance. It was more than a hair tool, it was a relic of another existence, a whisper from a distant place. He watched her thumb trace the carving's curves, a silent caress, and the unshed tears that shimmered in her eyes, mirroring the firelight. The comb was a slender yet potent tether, binding her to a home from which she'd been violently torn, a life that now seemed impossibly remote. The air between them, already thick with the quiet hum of the wilderness, seemed to grow heavy with her yearning. A familiar stirring awoke within him, a deep, protective instinct he seldom revealed. This woman, so far from her own people, vulnerable yet remarkably resilient, had stirred something profound in his spirit. He envisioned the vast, untamed land separating them from her distant shores, a journey of unimaginable length and peril. But as he looked from the wooden comb to her tear-filled eyes, a silent resolve solidified within him. Tall Eagle met her gaze, his own unwavering. He remained silent, for words often faltered where true understanding resided. Instead, he offered a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a promise, conveyed not by sound but by the conviction in his eyes, a pledge to guide her across the impossible distance, to help her find her way back to the land of blossoming plum trees, whatever challenges lay ahead. The unknown stretched before them, immense and daunting, yet the sight of her sorrow, held within the delicate curve of that wooden comb, had charted a new course for his own journey. Lessons on the trail. The sun, a fiery disk, began its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and deep purple. Tall Eagle paused, his keen eyes scanning the dusty ground. He knelt, pointing to a barely discernible indentation. "Dear," he rumbled, his voice a low vibration. "Moving north, less than an hour ago." May, initially hesitant, knelt beside him. She'd always lived in the bustling confines of settlements, the wilderness a distant, intimidating concept. Now, Tall Eagle was peeling back its layers. He showed her the subtle scuff of a hoof, the way a broken twig pointed a silent direction, the crushed blades of grass that spoke of recent passage. Her fingers, accustomed to delicate silk, traced the outline of the hoof print. It was a language she was eager to learn. Later, as they rested near a whispering stream, Tall Eagle was meticulously retying a leather thong on his hunting knife. His movements were efficient, strong. May, watching him, plucked a handful of long, pliable grass. Her fingers, nimble and precise, began to weave. She didn't speak, but her hands moved with a practiced grace, twisting, looping, tightening. Soon, a small, intricate knot, resembling a delicate flower, emerged from the green strands. Tall Eagle stopped, his eyes drawn to the unexpected artistry. He took the woven grass from her, turning it over in his calloused palm. It was beautiful, a silent testament to a different kind of strength. He grunted, a sound that May was beginning to interpret as approval. He held it for a moment longer, then carefully tucked it into the pouch at his belt. The days that followed fell into a rhythm of quiet learning. May learned to identify different bird calls, to spot the shimmer of water from afar, to move with a lighter step through the undergrowth. Tall Eagle, in turn, found himself observing her, fascinated by her ability to turn simple tasks into small acts of creation. She braided wild berries into her hair, fashioned a crude but effective sunshade from large leaves, and even managed to mend a tear in his buckskin tunic with surprising deftness, using a thorn as a needle and sinew as thread. Their shared silence was not empty, it was a space filled with observation, with unspoken questions and gentle answers. The fear that had once clouded May's eyes began to recede, replaced by a growing curiosity and a quiet strength. Tall Eagle, for his part, found a lightness in his stride, a subtle shift in the landscape of his solitary journey. The trail, once just a path, was now a shared journey, etched with the silent lessons they taught each other. The return of shadows. The crisp morning air carried the scent of pine and damp earth. Tall Eagle, ever vigilant, paused by a shallow stream, his eyes scanning the soft mud bank. A fresh set of boot prints, distinct and heavy, marred the otherwise pristine ground. Not deer, not bear, and certainly not his own. His jaw tightened. He knelt, tracing the outline of a boot with a finger, noting the telltale hobnails. He stood, his gaze sweeping the tree line, a silent warning in his posture. May, who had been gathering wild berries, noticed the sudden shift in his demeanor. "What is it?" she asked, her voice a soft murmur. Tall Eagle pointed to the tracks without a word. May's eyes followed his finger, and a shiver ran down her spine as she recognized the menacing pattern. They found us," she whispered, the berries forgotten in her hand. "Silas," Tall Eagle rumbled, his voice low and dangerous. He grabbed his rifle, motioning for May to follow. There was no time to waste. They moved with a newfound urgency, the easy pace of the morning shattered. The forest, once a comforting haven, now felt like a labyrinth of potential traps. They ran for what felt like an eternity, the rhythmic pounding of their feet on the forest floor echoing the frantic beat of May's heart. Tall Eagle led them through dense thickets and over rocky outcrops, his knowledge of the land proving invaluable. Just as May's legs threatened to give out, he veered sharply, disappearing behind a cascade of overgrown vines. She pushed through after him, finding herself in a narrow crevice that opened into a small, dry cave. The air inside was cool and still, a welcome reprieve from the frantic chase. Tall Eagle quickly arranged some loose stones and branches to obscure the entrance further, leaving only a tiny crack through which they could observe. They huddled together in the dim light, the silence inside the cave amplifying the sounds from outside. A snapping twig. The muffled curses of a man. The creak of leather. Silas and his men were close, their voices growing clearer with each passing moment. May pressed herself against the cold rock, her breath catching in her throat. Tall Eagle placed a reassuring hand on her arm, his touch steady despite the rising tension. He peered through the crack, his eyes narrowed, tracking the approaching danger. A shadow flickered past the opening, then another. The sound of heavy footsteps grew louder, closer, echoing the return of the shadows they had hoped to leave behind. A fight for freedom. The air crackled with a tension that made May's heart pound against her ribs. Tall Eagle, an unyielding sentinel, stood between her and the approaching menace. Silas, snake-eyed Blackwood, his face a mask of greasy avarice, led his motley crew, their grins predatory. "Well, look what the wind blew in," Snake-Eye sneered, his gaze lingering on May with an unnerving possessiveness. "Hand over the girl, warrior, and we might let you walk away with all your teeth." Tall Eagle's only response was the whisper of his fingers on the bowstring, an arrow already notched, aimed with lethal precision. His eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian, fixed on Snake-Eye. The bandit leader, though outwardly blustering, flinched almost imperceptibly. He knew Tall Eagle's reputation. With a guttural yell, one of Snake-Eye's men charged, a rusty axe glinting dangerously. Tall Eagle released the arrow. It flew true, piercing the man's shoulder, sending him sprawling with a cry of pain. Another bandit, emboldened by a swig from a flask, lunged, a long knife flashing. Tall Eagle met him with a swift, economical movement. His own blade, a polished obsidian shard, parried the attack, then drove forward, finding its mark in the man's leg. The bandit howled, clutching his wound. May, initially frozen in terror, watched the brutal efficiency of Tall Eagle's defense. Her fear, a cold knot in her stomach, began to transmute into something else, a fierce, protective surge. Her gaze darted to the ground, spotting a pile of loose, sharp rocks. Without a second thought, she scooped up a handful, her hands trembling but determined. "Hey!" she screamed, her voice surprisingly loud, and hurled a rock with all her might. It bounced off Snake-Eye's head with a satisfying thud. He staggered, cursing, momentarily distracted from Tall Eagle's focused assault. "You little demon!" Snake-Eye roared, rubbing his scalp. This momentary break was all Tall Eagle needed. He moved like a phantom, sidestepping another attack, his knife a blur. Two more of Snake-Eye's men were put out of commission, nursing various cuts and bruises. May, emboldened, continued her barrage, throwing rocks and yelling, her small figure a surprisingly effective diversion. One particularly well-aimed stone struck Snake-Eye square on the nose, drawing a yelp of pain and a trickle of blood. "He's got help." Snake Eye shrieked, his bravado crumbling. She's a wildcat. Retreat. The remaining bandits, battered and demoralized, didn't need a second invitation. They scrambled back, disappearing into the sparse brush, leaving their wounded behind. Tall Eagle watched them go, his bow still at the ready, until their retreating figures vanished completely. Silence descended, broken only by the whimpering of the injured bandits. May, her chest heaving, dropped the last rock from her hand. She looked at Tall Eagle, her eyes wide, a mix of relief and a dawning sense of her own unexpected courage. He met her gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible nod of approval on his stern face. For now, they were safe. Healing and new feelings. The last echo of the gunshot faded, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Tall Eagle, despite his usual stoicism, sagged slightly against the rough bark of a cottonwood, a hand instinctively rising to his temple. May, her breath still catching in her throat, saw a thin crimson line tracing down his forehead, just above his left eye. Her own fear, momentarily forgotten in the adrenaline of the fight, returned as concern. "You're hurt," she whispered, her voice still a little shaky. She moved towards him, her gaze fixed on the wound. Tall Eagle waved a dismissive hand. "A scratch. Nothing." But he didn't pull away when she reached for him, her fingers surprisingly gentle. She scanned the immediate surroundings, her eyes falling on a cluster of broad, cool-looking leaves near the creek bed. Without a word, she hurried to them, plucking a few and returning to his side. She dipped one in the clear water of the stream, then carefully pressed it to the cut. The cool, damp sensation was a welcome contrast to the burning sting. He watched her, his dark eyes intense, following her every precise movement. The proximity, the shared vulnerability after the harrowing encounter, created an unspoken current between them. He felt the soft brush of her fingers, the quiet focus in her expression. It was a different kind of bravery than he was accustomed to, but no less powerful. May, for her part, felt the warmth emanating from him, the solidness of his presence. His earlier ferocity had given way to a quiet strength that resonated deeply within her. She met his gaze, and in that moment, the chaos of their recent past, the vastness of the wilderness, and the uncertainty of their future seemed to fade. All that remained was the profound connection between them. The leaves, pressed against his skin, felt like a balm, not just for the cut, but for something deeper. A shared understanding passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of their improbable bond. A warmth, not from the sun, but from within, began to bloom in May's chest. She saw a similar flicker in Tall Eagle's eyes, a recognition that transcended words. It was a feeling of safety, of belonging, utterly unexpected yet profoundly comforting. The wilderness, for a brief, precious moment, didn't feel so vast and threatening. A path forward. The sun dipped low, painting the western sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. Tall Eagle, having tended to their meager fire, sat across from May. He pointed east, a slow, deliberate gesture, then tapped his chest. "Tall Eagle," he rumbled, enunciating his name clearly. Then he pointed to May. "You?" May, still a little guarded but less overtly fearful than before, understood the question. She touched her own chest. "May," she whispered, the sound soft as rustling leaves. Tall Eagle nodded, a flicker of satisfaction in his dark eyes. He then drew a rough circle in the dirt, indicating a long journey, and pointed again to the east. He made a gesture like someone speaking, then another, pointing to May, then to the imagined distant place. He repeated the speaking gesture, hoping to convey the idea of others, of her language. It was a clumsy charade, but his earnestness shone through. He finished by patting the ground next to him, then pointing to the east again, a clear invitation. May watched his hands, her brow furrowed in concentration. The circle, the distant point, the mimed speaking, a slow dawning of understanding illuminated her features. He wanted to take her somewhere. Somewhere far. Somewhere with others. someone who spoke like her? A breath she hadn't realized she was holding escaped her. A profound sense of relief washed over her, chilling her skin even in the evening warmth. Her gaze met his, and for the first time, a genuine, unburdened smile touched her lips. She nodded, once, then twice, a silent affirmation of her trust. The next morning, the air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine. May mounted the spare horse with a newfound resolve. The journey ahead was daunting, a vast expanse of unknown territory, but the oppressive weight of her immediate past had lifted. Tall Eagle led the way, his back a steady, unwavering presence. She watched the powerful muscles shift beneath his buckskin shirt, a silent promise of protection. As they rode, the rising sun cast long shadows before them, stretching out like a path into the future. The landscape unfolded, a tapestry of rolling hills and distant mountains, but it no longer felt entirely hostile. With each hoofbeat against the earth, a faint hope bloomed within May's heart. Tall Eagle had offered more than just safe passage, he had offered a chance, a glimmer of light in the overwhelming darkness. Their shared silence on the trail was not empty, but filled with the unspoken understanding of a journey begun, a future unfolding beneath the vast, indifferent sky.